fought and some died for their homeland. They fought and some died, now it's our land. Look at his little child, there's no fear in her eyes. Could he not show respect for other dads who have died? Take 2 minutes.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Remembrance Day coverage here, our 2025 Remembrance Day coverage. You'll get to hear more of Terry Kelly and his song you hear in the background there, A Pittance of Time, a little later on. Tremendous story that goes along with that song, and we'll try and take the time to tell it later in our coverage. Our special Remembrance Day coverage has become a staple here at CJAD, and I know so many of you look forward to it every year. It is the least we can do to honor the sacrifices of all those who have served in the nation's defense. Now, Andrew Carter does a tremendous job with this broadcast every year, and I hope this year we can match the standard he has set, and my thanks for all the help that he and his team gave us in preparing for this year's show. I do want to talk about the poppy just for a moment, and I've been noticing in my day-to-day, I've seen a lot of poppies out there. I know every year it seems maybe a little bit different. I'm seeing a lot this year. This is the first Remembrance Day where my son is noticing the poppies that people wear. I picked him up the other day. He was in my arms, and he was instantly enamored with the red poppy on my jacket. I taught him the word poppy. I said, this is a poppy. And since then, he's been happily exclaiming, poppy, poppy, every time he sees one. Now, in the coming years, I'll be teaching him just what that poppy represents. So I hope that you've been wearing your poppy proudly, and we will take the moments necessary here to pause and reflect on the sacrifices that so many have made serving the country, what that poppy represents. We are going to hear from very special people over the course of our special coverage. You're going to get to hear the story of this year's Silver Cross mother and remember the family members who have sacrificed so much. You're also going to hear the story of Montreal West's role in the Second World War. We will also have our traditional reading of In Flanders Field. That's coming up in a bit. And of course, we will pause with a moment of silence, 2 minutes of silence, at 11 a.m. Now, why 11 a.m.? You get that question a lot. Why is it 11? Why is it at 11? Well, because World War I hostilities formally ended at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, in accordance with the armistice that was signed by representatives of Germany and the Entente being that military coalition, the international military coalition of countries led by France and the United Kingdom, Russia, the United States, Italy, and Japan. It was signed between 5:12 and 5:20 that morning. The guns were to go silent at 11 a.m. And that's why we remember at 11 a.m. on November 11th every year. At cenotaphs across the country, there will be wreaths laid. I'm seeing the Prime Minister showing up in Ottawa this morning. Those showing up to honor the war dead. Cenotaph is literally the Greek word for an empty tomb. And we will also hear the last post and Rouse part of our coverage this morning. If you are downtown this morning, and I see the people assembling at Dominion Square, you will hear the booming of guns echoing through the urban canyons of skyscrapers. That's just some of what is coming up. I want to take a moment here to talk about World War I. Canada's war effort and losses in the First World War, it was called the War to End All Wars. We know how that turned out, but it was called the War to End All Wars. Our losses were staggering. More than 60,000 Canadians killed. Basically 1 in 10 of the 619,000 Canadians who enlisted. And our population at the time of World War I was just about 8 million, okay? So you think about that toll, staggering. Another 172,000 were wounded. Many more returning home, broken in mind and body. So just part of the reason why today is so important for us to remember. I remember being a child, my first interactions with Remembrance Day coming at school. And I remember closing my eyes during that moment of remembrance, not knowing exactly what it meant. But over the years, I've come to know. What we have here in this country, what we have in Canada, is very unique. Over 8 billion people on planet Earth. Only a billion of the 8 live in Western liberal democracies. What we have here in Canada needs to be cherished. I hope today will serve that purpose. I want to talk about In Flanders Fields. It's a war poem. It was written in the form of a rondo. It was written in the First World War by Canadian physician, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. He was inspired to write it on May 3rd, 1915, after presiding over the funeral of a friend and fellow soldier, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer, who died in the Second Battle of Ypres, that in Belgium, a battle that lasted more than a month. The battlefield had been churned up by the artillery bombardment, destroyed the ditches that acted as a drainage system. It rained for 3 weeks straight. Soldiers struggling through heavy rain, sticky mud, reached up to their waists. That lush countryside was transformed into a desolate, muddy mess. So picture John McCrae in the midst of that hell, sitting back on the back of an ambulance and writing this poem. And he looks around and remarks how the poppies, the red poppies, quickly grew around the graves of those who died on the battlefield. That place where he wrote In Flanders Fields has become known as the John McCrae Memorial Site. According to legend, fellow soldiers retrieved the poem after McCrae, dissatisfied with his work, threw it in the trash. In Flanders Fields was first published on December 8th of that year in the London magazine Punch. Flanders Fields, the common English name of the World War battlefields in Belgium and France. It is one of the most quoted poems from the war. And as I mentioned, referencing those red poppies that grew on the tombs of those soldiers, that grew above the graves of those soldiers. John McCrae, at one point, wrote a letter to his mother describing the battles that he witnessed. Here's what he wrote to his mother. For 17 days and 17 nights, none of us have had our clothes off, nor our boots even, except occasionally. In all that time while I was awake, gunfire and rifle fire never ceased for 60 seconds. And behind it all was the constant background of the sights of the dead, the wounded, the maimed, and a terrible anxiety lest the line should give way. John McCrae writing to his mom. So here's the poem. In at least one handwritten and autographed version, McCrae ends the first line with grow instead of blow. Here it is in Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row. That marks our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw, the torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. John McCrae in 1915. It's a special year for Flanders Fields. Just a week ago, 4 handwritten copies of John McCrae's iconic poem In Flanders Fields were preserved, or that they're preserved at McGill University, and they've been recognized as documentary heritage of outstanding universal value by UNESCO. So it is a big year for In Flanders Fields. World War I, of course, was not the war to end all wars. We'll talk a little bit more about World War II, which came next a little bit later. You're listening to CJAD 800's coverage of Remembrance Day, and now, the act of remembrance. They shall grow not old, as we that left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them. We shall remember them. the last post there. You're listening to our coverage here on CJAD 800 of Remembrance Day 2025. Marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and we are losing those veterans. We've lost so many of them. There are still a few that remain. Looking at the Globe and Mail this morning, they have the story of one Canadian veteran, now 103 years old. We will not have those veterans forever. And on this 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, all the more reason to pause and remember. Please join with us now in 2 minutes of silence to remember those who have given the ultimate sacrifice so that we may live in freedom. That is what we call the lament, a bagpiper playing the lament. It symbolizes the sounds of women and children crying over their dead. And now the commitment to remember. They were young, as we are young. They served, giving freely of themselves. To them we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them. This is the Rouse. Thank you so much for listening to our special coverage today of Remembrance Day. The National Silver Cross Mother acts on behalf of all Canadian mothers and families who've lost a son or daughter in the line of service. The Memorial Cross, more commonly referred to as the Silver Cross, was introduced on December 1st of 1919. It is a symbol of personal loss and sacrifice on behalf of widows and mothers who lose a child on active duty or whose death is later attributed to such duty. The Royal Canadian Legion announced at the beginning of the month that Mrs. Nancy Payne of Lansdowne, Ontario, is this year's National Silver Cross Mother. Just moments ago, Nancy placed a wreath at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. CTV's Abigail Biman has her story.
He would walk into a room with this big grin on his face and those eyes, you just knew he was up to something, and he just sort of drew people towards him.
Corporal Randy Payne, a military police officer serving on the close protection team for VIPs in Afghanistan. One of 4 soldiers killed when a roadside bomb hit this G-Wagon.
He was so excited going to Afghanistan. I'm thinking, oh my, Afghanistan. But he was so excited, I had to be happy for him. And I was, I told him that, but deep down I wasn't.
A son in a military family, Nancy Payne is this year's Silver Cross Mother.
It means a lot to represent all the mothers who have lost sons and daughters.
Randy was killed April 2006. 1,000 people showed up for his funeral. For Nancy, it feels like both yesterday and decades ago.
One of his bosses said that they should never have sent him over because he had such a future. He was very good at everything he did there in the policing. He was firm, fair, and friendly.
Payne calls the Silver Cross a huge honor and helps in her quest to make sure Randy is never forgotten. But there's much being done to remember. An award every year at his old high school. And this bridge, the first in Canada to be named for a military police officer. His mother drives by several times a week.
I just talked to him. I says, oh, we miss you, Randy. And I have my own little, rest in peace. And we'll be together again someday.
When Randy was killed, his children were 5 and 7. Tristan spoke at his funeral.
When you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you.
Now daughter Jasmine has a son of her own, Tommy. Randy would have been a grandfather.
He'll have this look on his face like it's just, to me, it's just part of Randy coming out.
Comforted by the feeling and by the knowledge that this Remembrance Day Canadians will remember Randy, with a new generation learning about his story and his service for the first time. Abigail Beeman, CTV News, Lansdowne, Ontario.
And there, the story of Mrs. Nancy Payne of Lansdowne, Ontario, reminding us that those sacrifices continue to this day through military service that Canadians give. Now let's head to Dominion Square, to the cenotaph in Dominion Square, where we find Bruce Bolton, Honorary Colonel of the Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. Bruce, welcome this morning.
Good morning, Elias.
I wonder if the years are different for you, if every year has a different significance. And I don't know if it has to do with weather or anniversaries, like this year being the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. How does each year at the cenotaph change for you?
It changes because every year there's something different to remember. So, for example, this morning on my way in, I was saying to myself, with all the snow and the cold, our soldiers in World War I were wearing kilts on a day like today in the trenches. So for us to be here today in the snow wearing our kilts is a sign of remembrance that we all have to remember. What they gave to us in World War I and then in World War II is a freedom that we can't really understand fully except when we come to remembrance on the November 11th at 11 o'clock.
We're losing, and as we hear the guns go off behind you.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Every year that passes, we lose. There's so few left, right, of World War II, 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. That passage of time and those we lose every year. How significant is it?
Well, I grew up just post-war. My father was a sergeant major in the regiment and was wounded 3 times. And I got to meet his buddies and even some World War I veterans. And they were a class of people. They came back with experiences that they rarely talked about, but with a way of doing things that we really are missing today. And they came back with a sense of community. And that's what I grew up with. It was drilled into me that we had to support our communities in every way we can. And volunteerism was the way of doing that.
Bruce, tell us about this year's ceremony. Obviously under snow cover. How has this year's ceremony gone?
Well, the ceremony is amazing in the sense that the square is full. I would say that we're at probably 80%, 90% of what normally comes. It's actually quite surprising to see the number of people here. I've been doing this parade for nigh on 50, 60 years. And this is a very good turnout for a day like today. I have to say that I've done this parade in worse conditions, but every time I do it, it's absolutely worth the little bit of survival training that we have to go through.
Bruce, tell me about the faces you see there gathered this morning.
Well, I think what's changed over the years is the diversity. We have, soldiers from the Canadian Grenadier Guards, the Black Watch, the pipes and drums of the Black Watch. They have police officers standing right in front of me, and we can see in every soldier what makes Canada Canada. The diversity is absolutely amazing.
Bruce, you join us, it seems, seemingly every year. Thank you so much for speaking to our listeners on a morning like this morning and helping us all remember.
Elias, it's so important. We have to remember November 11th at 11 o'clock.
Bruce Bolton, Honorary Colonel of the Black Watch, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. 1 million Canadians served in the Second World War, and many did not return home. World War II saw 45,000 Canadian soldiers killed and 55,000 return home wounded. As we honor those who fought on Remembrance Day, let's look back on Canada's accomplishments and sacrifices in that war. David O'Keefe is a Canadian military historian and professor of history at Marianopolis College, and he joins us now. David, welcome to the program.
Well, good morning. Thank you.
When you have a milestone year like 80 years, right? Does it get any more significant to you on a year when you have an anniversary like 80?
Well, as a military historian, probably not, but I think for the general public, it does. It tends to focus, our attention on the efforts. And it really is. I mean, you said it right off the start. I mean, we love, there were 100,000 men who came home forever, or at least went off to war. 45,000 didn't come home. Another 55,000 came home completely changed. And of course, there's, all the others who did come home too, whose lives were never the same because of those experiences. And you think about our contribution. I mean, we sent almost 1 million, or we had 1 million people in uniform during the Second World War. We only had a population of just over 10 million. Mm-hmm. So that's, 1 in 10 people, going off to war. It's incredible when you think about the effort, the per capita effort that we put in. We certainly punched way above our weight class.
Tell me about those Canadian soldiers and the reputation they built through the war.
Well, I mean, their reputation actually goes back to the end of the First World War, where Canada was considered to be the shock army of the British Empire. I mean, we had been handed some of the nastiest jobs to do in World War I, and through a very long, hard school, we learned how to do it. And even though we had a bit of a retrenchment period, to say the least, in the 1920s and 30s, by the time we got into World War II, there was still a bit of that hanging around. That legacy was still hanging around. And although we really didn't get into the thick of the fighting until 1943 in Sicily and then Italy and then finally in Normandy, when there was a tough job to be done, they certainly did look at the Canadians to do it.
What are some of the main battles that Canada was involved in during the war?
Well, of course, I mean, for the most part, Dieppe was our first, one-day butcher and bolt raid in 1942, which turned out to be a disaster. We also had a couple of battalions at Hong Kong. And a lot of people tend to forget that, right from day one, right through every single day of the war to the end, the Royal Canadian Navy was fighting in the Atlantic. Not to mention our Air Force, whether it be part of Fighter Command in defending in the Battle of Britain, or, of course, as part of Bomber Command, delivering strategic bombing to or over Germany. But on land, I mean, we went into battle in Sicily and up the Italian boot. And then, of course, probably our most famous moment was coming ashore on June 6th on D-Day and then fighting through Normandy. And then from there was the liberation of France, the liberation of Belgium, and into conquering Germany. But I would have to say that our finest hour really comes at the end of the war with the liberation of Holland. It wasn't just a question of liberating the Dutch from Nazi tyranny, but also remember that the Germans had inflicted a starvation campaign on the Dutch. And so as a result, when we arrived with food. And that was something that was unparalleled in Canadian military history, where we weren't just there to conquer an enemy. We were there to put an ally back on their feet. And I really think it was Canada's finest hour.
And to this day, I've been lucky enough to travel to Holland, and to this day, the people there, when you tell them they're Canadian, they certainly remember that.
Oh, there's nothing like it. There's something in the DNA, without a doubt, for Holland. I mean, there's no doubt there's an appreciation in France and in Belgium for liberation. But there's something different, and I've always attributed to the fact that we fed them, and the very basic necessity of life, and that is something that they've never forgotten. And indeed, as you say, it has developed an incredibly special relationship between our two countries.
Can we take a moment here to talk about D-Day and the Battle of Normandy and just what Canadian soldiers accomplished on D-Day?
Yeah, it really is remarkable what they did. I mean, you are taking on the toughest nut to crack, really, Hitler's Atlantic Wall. And we are standing shoulder to shoulder with our British and American allies on that day, and we can really hold our heads high. We landed on Juno Beach. We pushed in farther than any other units on that day. But remember, we also paid a price. We watched Saving Private Ryan, and we see the hell that was Omaha Beach. Juno wasn't far behind. There were a lot of men, but close to 400 that lost their lives just on that day itself, and about another 5,000 to 6,000 that lost their lives just in the Normandy campaign. But at the end of the day, I mean, we had Juno Beach, we had Carpiquet Airport, we had Caen, Verrières Ridge, the Falaise Gap, and eventually closing the Falaise Pocket. It was an incredible feat of arms for a country that was considered at best to be a middle power.
How did Canada's contributions in World War II shape the nation we have today?
Well, I think in many cases, I think it just brought us together. It showed us what we could do in times of emergency, in times of strife, coming together, putting aside differences to get the job done. And of course, there were a whole bunch of different social aspects that came out of it, whether it become, essentially creating health and social services, welfare states, understanding, how to develop a society. A lot of things came out of there. But really, again, as much as we punched above our weight class on the battlefield, we also did so in the economic world as well. We really took the opportunity to claw our way up to middle management, if you will, on the world stage.
Professor O'Keefe, David, I want to thank you so much for coming on our program today and sharing with our listeners.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
David O'Keefe is a Canadian military historian and professor of history at Marianopolis College.
We have shared the incommunicable experience of war.
The reason I volunteered for the army was because I didn't like the monsters sitting in Berlin. We were kind of duty-bound.
We hated what Hitler stood for, and, he killed all those people, and he was so ruthless in his attacks. We figured that it would be a disaster for the human race if he survived.
One fellow there was walking across from my trench to another trench in the center of the field and just ready to jump into the trench when a shell struck him right in the chest. And he fell right into the trench on another fellow that was in the trench. And that fellow went berserk, and everybody standing around stunned. This is our first casualty.
At Dieppe, with only 5,000 of our troops involved, we had almost 1,000 killed and 2,000 taken prisoner, many of them wounded in just 6 hours battle.
On Christmas Day, 1943, going across no man's land, I saw this little boy lying mortally wounded. I took his little hand in mine. The tears filled my eyes. I thought of how afraid he must have been with no mother to hold and comfort him as he lay there dying on a blood-soaked battlefield among the dead and dying soldiers. We have to find a way to solve problems without killing on some battlefield where the innocent become casualties.
So I jumped and pulled a ripcord, and I was floating down to the ground, and I hearing the cannons and the machine guns going, and of all things, the birds were chirping and singing like mad. I couldn't believe it.
As we've mentioned, 1 million Canadians served in the Second World War, and some parts of the country served at higher rates than others. Take the town of Montreal West. There, citizens chose active service at a rate 1.5 times higher than the national average. In his book, One Town in a Very Long War, Dr. Robert Drummond tells the story of 47 men from Montreal West who enlisted, went to war, and did not return home. The book tells the stories of these men whose lives were cut short in the battlefields from Normandy to the North Atlantic, or from the skies over Europe to the jungles of Asia. Dr. Robert Drummond joins us now on the line. Dr. Drummond, thanks so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you very much for the kind invitation.
What inspired you to write this book?
Basically, it was the citizens of our town. I remember sitting in a coffee shop on one very cold November morning, not realizing it was the Remembrance Day parade, and I was there with my daughter, and I saw this parade of Boy Scouts and Girl Guides and veterans parade down Westminster towards the Cenotaph on a miserable day, and I'm like, I'm so fortunate to live in this community. And so I've always passed by the Cenotaph and read the names with reverence, but it was after that experience that I really started to think about it more deeply and how we could commemorate those men, because reading their names is one thing, but personalizing is another. And I'd seen a project that was done, I believe, in a community in New Brunswick where they had put banners up on their town street with the pictures of the men who had fallen and a brief biography. And I thought, well, because we're such a small community with respect to population and geographically, it it would probably work here, and it clearly did.
But telling 47 stories, that seems like such a daunting challenge. How did you do it? Tell me about how you put this to paper.
Well, the first step after reaching out to our mayor at the time, Benny Masella, and his town council, who were very supportive from the get-go, there was no questions, said, please go ahead. I reached out to our town historian, who pulled out his dusty binders of newspaper clippings from back in the day, and that was the starting point. And then I would do some research online, and I would drive to Ottawa monthly to consult the Library and Archives Canada, because at that point in time, their service records were not digitized. So I would go there and open up these volumes that had not seen light in over 80 years and go to the various libraries in Montreal at McGill and pull out the microfiches and start digging through their stories.
Now, you're telling 47 stories in your book, and I know it must be difficult to pick one of them or two of them. But on today, on Remembrance Day, I'd love to hear you tell our listeners one story of this book that you feel is particularly poignant on Remembrance Day.
I could tell you, about, bravery on the battlefield, be it in the air or the sea or on land, but those aren't the stories that resonate with me. There was one gentleman, Lloyd Higginson. He was a pilot, and his story resonates for two different reasons. Number one, he wrote home regularly, and his family wrote back to him. And his youngest sister, Mildred, who I had the privilege of speaking to before she passed, told me about how she would write to him and how he would always minimize what was going on his various missions. But she shared one letter about how she remembered vividly saying goodbye to him on the front porch and how she could not wait for him to come home and welcome him in the same spot. Mm. Unfortunately, that letter was returned to her unopened because he had died before he ever received it on a mission the week before. Oh. So the pathos of that family, and I've spoken to this family on numerous of occasions, and they have not forgotten their Uncle Lloyd. But the second reason that his story resonates for me is that, and this is why ostensibly this book is about the men of Montreal West, but in fact it's the story of Canada's youth at war, because Montreal West could have been any Canadian town, because Lloyd would often stay with a local family when he was not, flying over Germany. And this family, got to know Lloyd, to love him as his family did. And they wrote this, poignant, heartbreaking letter back home to comfort his family. But they said that, we got to know so much about Canada, and, its people from Lloyd because of the love that he expressed, for, his nation, that I think, he said he was your country's best ambassador. And I think in today's day and age, we as Canadians need to be reminded of that. It's the kindness that sets us apart.
Dr. Drummond, it's incredible how if you can tell the story of one soldier or one small town. In this case, it's Montreal West, but it really tells the story of an entire country. I want to thank you so much for taking the time for our listeners this morning. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much for having me and for allowing me to tell the story at least of one of our men.
Dr. Robert Drummond there. And again, the title of the book, which I think you should all be looking up right now, One Town in a Very Long War. The Sons of Montreal West, Remembering the Town That Gave Its Best. And from the world wars, many conflicts since then, want to remember all those soldiers that gave the ultimate sacrifice. Through peacekeeping efforts, also participation in multinational coalitions, including the Korean War, the Gulf War, the Kosovo War, and the Afghan War. I have one note from Annie as we end our special coverage this morning from Annie, who writes that she's the sister, daughter, and granddaughter of veterans, and she is remembering with all of you today. Thank you so much for listening. We end our special broadcast with O Canada.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.